CEO at Fireflies. What we're doing at Fireflies is building an AI meeting assistant that captures and transcribes your conversations. It makes it really easy to search, share, and collaborate across any meetings you've ever had. Our AI assistant's name is Fred. And as you can imagine, with all the remote work that's going on, we're having a lot of web conferencing meetings. So Fireflies or Fred can join your meetings across Zoom, Google Meet, Skype, Microsoft Teams, and a dozen other web conferencing platforms. After the meeting, you'll be able to show you the transcripts, the recordings, surface up notes, recommend action items, deadlines, and other important topics. And finally, we're trying to put all this information into systems where you already work, like Salesforce or Slack. And helping really remote teams be more productive and turn everything from their conversations and their meetings into actions. So that's a little bit about Fireflies.
And so, Krish, one thing that I think is really interesting about Fireflies as well, not only from a product standpoint, but from the team that you're building, is that you took a fully distributed remote team, remote first kind of mindset from the start of building the company. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the choice to do that, and how that's also kind of shaped the direction of Fireflies, the organization, and culture as a whole of the company.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. The origins of Fireflies started off remote, and it was totally subconscious. The story goes back to college when me and my co-founder Sam were working together on various hackathons and projects. I had never met Sam. I had met him online through a couple mutual friends. We were working on a crypto hackathon, and for 2 years we worked fully remote. Never met him in person. I was then off at Microsoft. Sam was at MIT. I was at Penn, so 2 different locations. And every day after class, after we finished our problem sets, we would essentially hop on a video conferencing call like this, and we'd just be working. We'd be working and brainstorming and just doing, hacking together things. Mm-hmm. So 2 years later, we ended up, actually seeing each other in person and just continued where it left off. And so subconsciously from day one, we were documenting, we were remote, and we also chose to make the team remote from day one. So even though Sam and I moved our company to SF, we were working remote about half the time. And then as we started adding on folks, so today there are employees across 5 different countries, 9 different locations, fully remote. Each person is in different locations. And what I've found through this whole process is if you start off remote, it's a lot easier, just as it is if you start off in a centralized location, it's a lot easier. I think it's those hybrid models that are harder to adopt and adjust to. But I think what we're seeing now with COVID is a lot of large organizations, not like 10-person, 100-person startups, but large organizations having to shift focus to that. And it's really interesting to see how this is scaling up, and these folks are having to prove out a necessity that it can work at scale, which is really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And so talk a little bit about that. So building a team kind of remote from the start across 5 different continents or countries, just having to deal with different time zones, different languages. What is the toolkit that you use to bring everyone together? Like, other than obviously Fireflies that you're using, what else are you using as you build the organization?
Yeah. So one thing about our organization, or at least what we've learned, is we built Fireflies because we hate having redundant meetings. And so Fireflies helps us not have to pull up or repeat meetings or have repetitive meetings. And one of the things you have to really be able to do in a remote setting is write really well and communicate over text and messaging. Slack is core to a lot of what we do today. We're using tools like Zoom and Google Meet and G Suite in general. We're starting to adapt different tools for cross collaboration like Notion. And I think the pinnacle of all of this, where we're seeing with remote, is it can be really lightweight. And in the early days, it's hard to set up that process because you're not having that face-to-face interaction. So a lot of that serendipity that you'd have, or ideas that get spit out while you're talking, get missed. And so when you are working in this remote context, you have to methodically document everything, and you have to also hire people that are more natural at communicating this way, right? Typically engineers, want to be left alone and they want to work in this sort of environment. So most of our team is engineering today. So that actually works out to our benefit. There are other scenarios where we've started seeing, because we started having these processes where we were forced to from day one, from onboarding to training to getting people to roll out stuff as quickly as possible once they're hired. It actually makes it easier each incremental hire. And so what we felt is remote teams might be able to scale a lot faster at a certain sweet spot because you're just forced to document everything. You don't have to repeat anything at all. There's a company called like GitLab, which I'm sure many of you guys know. They're 100% remote, and they have a massive playbook of what it takes to be a remote team. So I definitely suggest checking that out. And one of the things they've decided to do as a good framework is anything that the founder or one of the teammates had to say over again or repeat to a new person, they would just document it. And so they have like a 90-day guide of like, hey, here's everything you're going to be doing to onboard. And it just, when you're doing one or two people, like onboarding one or two people, it's a lot easier doing it manually. But when you're hiring hundreds, I think that's where remote becomes quite interesting.
Right, definitely. So let's dive a little bit into the Fireflies product itself. Tell us about just walk us through how a user would use Fireflies and how you guys use it internally for your meetings.
Yeah, so I was actually having a meeting with someone after 9 months, and I had zero recall of that conversation. And when I ended up looking back in my Fireflies logs or my notebook, which contains all of my past meetings, think about Fireflies almost like Dropbox for your meetings that you can search, review, and skim through. And so I was able to really like review a 1-hour meeting in 5 minutes and just have full context going in. And the person was asking me, how do you remember those small details? I don't even remember them. Like, so for the first time, and this was recently, like I started seeing like this value from using our own tool, which, you don't realize, because in the day-to-day, you're just saying, okay, we're helping people capture meetings. We're helping essentially create a knowledge base of all their conversations. But you start realizing as time goes on, that information just becomes totally lost. So today, that's not restricted to small teams or large companies, whether you're a salesperson having customer conversations, whether you're talking to vendors like I was, whether you're talking or interviewing candidates. We even go back and look at all of our past candidate interviews and see what are good patterns of what successful hires, what were things that they were saying. And all of those things was like what we found through that is, when it comes to us talking, we speak at 160 words per minute. When we type, it's 40 words per minute. So almost 4x. So from a first principles point of view, we're just saying a lot more important information. And then how do we tap into that? Because by the time I go to the next meeting after this, I've already forgot half of it. So that's where Firefly started. How we use our product today is it joins all of our meetings. It connects to our calendar, and I can invite Fred at Fireflies.AI to that meeting. And it just, after the meeting, it transcribes everything. And the best part is if I can't attend a meeting, one of my teammates is there, or they've invited Fireflies, I can get recall of that. So that's how we use it today.
Yeah. You and I use it internally too. Just we have weekly chats and catch-ups, and I find it always useful for that recall functionality to go back and kind of look to see what we talked about. Talk a little bit about the whole COVID quarantine shelter in place. I'm curious what the impact has been on Fireflies generally. Obviously, more meetings are happening virtually, but talk a little bit about kind of the feedback that you're getting too of new users coming in and using it, and how that's shaping the product direction, and what does the future of Fireflies kind of look like?
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've seen is before people would have half their meetings in person, half their meetings over Zoom or a web conferencing platform. Now, out of necessity, 100% of those meetings are online. And so automatically, people need a way to better manage their meetings. Like from a core principle point of view, how do you just stay on top of all that? It's quite taxing. In fact, I think people are working more now that they're remote because it's just so easy to hop on video conferencing. From us, we've definitely seen like where it just definitely takes a toll on your servers and like how you scale, and you have to think a lot more about that. But you also start thinking about, okay, if you're going fully remote, this is now like a 24/7 process, right? So for us, like, for better or for worse, COVID has added fuel to the fire. And I think a lot of remote companies are seeing their products becoming more and more important and a necessity. It also makes you start thinking about, okay, we've seen how it works when a small team adopts it. Now you have a larger organization. How do they organize their information? How do you essentially build a knowledge graph for them? So we have to like force ourselves to constantly think about adapting and evolving based on that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So it looks like we're running out of time, Krish. This has been super fun. I hope that other folks who are interested in Fireflies listening on this can interact with you for the rest of the day throughout this conference virtually. But yeah, thank you so much for the time today. This is fun.
Awesome. Thanks, Ray.